Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the Starlink 6-90 mission. I'm Stephen Young, and I'll be providing commentary for this afternoon's launch. Will Robinson-Smith is on assignment at the Space Power Conference. You're looking live at a Falcon 9 rocket standing on Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Nestled in the payload fairing at the top of the rocket are 29 Starlink satellites. Currently, liftoff is scheduled for 3:26 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 2026 UTC for our viewers around the world. Although Will is not on commentary duty today, he has filed a brief video report from the Space Power Conference, and we'll be coming to that later in the broadcast. Be sure to follow Will and the rest of the Spaceflight Now team on social media so you can keep up with all our photography and reporting. We're broadcasting, as usual, from Spaceflight Now's News Bureau at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Adam Bernstein is running our cameras this afternoon, and John Pisani is running the technical aspects of the broadcast. We'll also have support tracking this launch from our friends Pete Carstens at Max-Q Productions and Chuck and Jen Briggs of C&J Images. Also, a big thank you to our moderators in the chat for keeping the conversation polite and on topic. I see we have Jeff Hansen and Rick Donna today. Thank you so much for helping out. Spaceflight Now is powered by you, our viewers. Please hit the like button, click subscribe, and the notifications bell so you will know when new videos are posted and you won't miss any of our live streams. If you're able to do more to help improve and expand our coverage of the space program, we would very much appreciate it if you would consider making a donation through YouTube's Super Chat feature or by becoming a member of our YouTube channel. Membership grants you access to our special members-only videos, as well as discounts for our online shop. We can't do this coverage without your support. We're now less than 55 minutes away from the planned launch of this Falcon 9 rocket, carrying 29 satellites for SpaceX's Starlink internet service. As you can see from this view overlooking the Turn Basin at Launch Complex 39 at the Kennedy Space Center, it is a beautiful day to go fly a rocket from Florida. Taking a look at the satellite image, you can see we have mostly clear skies, a little bit of a wispy cloud to the south and offshore, but looking like perfect weather for the Falcon 9. The 45th Weather Squadron, based at Cape Canaveral, issued a forecast yesterday, and they gave less than 5% chance of a violation of the weather rules. They don't like to say 0%, but less than 5% is probably as good as it gets. There's also no concerns for upper-level wind shear or problems in the booster recovery area to the east of the Bahamas in the Atlantic, and no danger from any solar activity that might present a problem to the launch vehicle or the satellites once they leave Earth's atmosphere. We're at T-minus 50 minutes and 32 seconds and counting. We're less than 15 minutes away from the point at which the launch director will have had to have given their go for the start of propellant load for today's launch. SpaceX is running the countdown from its Launch Control Center, which is located inside the Hangar X facility, which is about 5.5 miles to the west of the pad. Falcon 9 boosters are also refurbished and prepared for flight in that building. Today's launch will also be supported by teams at SpaceX in Hawthorne, California. Let's take a look at the countdown timeline for today's Starlink mission. Around the T-minus 38 minute mark, the launch director will report the results of the go-no-go poll. If a go is given, propellant load will start at T-minus 35 minutes. That process begins with loading kerosene onto the first and second stages, along with liquid oxygen for the first stage. With 30 minutes on the clock, cryogenic helium load will get underway. The helium is loaded into carbon fiber pressure vessels, which are located inside the rocket's liquid oxygen tanks. Helium plays an important role pressurizing the rocket's tanks as the propellants are consumed. It keeps the liquid oxygen and kerosene flowing into the Merlin engines. The helium load starts with the first stage and continues with the second stage 4 minutes later. Loading of kerosene aboard the second stage should wrap up at around the T-minus 23 minute mark. Loading of kerosene into the much larger first stage fuel tank will continue into the final minutes of the countdown. The next major event for the launch team is the start of the Strongback chilldown process. The Strongback is the truss structure that sits alongside the rocket at the launch pad. In addition to supporting the vehicle, it serves as a conduit for propellant lines, air conditioning, and power for both the rocket's second stage and the payload fairing. We'll see this chill-down process in the form of this so-called big vent. A large cloud of vapor will be seen as the liquid oxygen lines are cooled before the next major milestone in the countdown. That comes at T-minus 16 minutes, when it's the turn of liquid oxygen to start flowing through those Strongback lines into the second stage. At T-minus 7 minutes, the chill down of the 9 Merlin first stage engines will get underway. This involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps. This procedure protects those engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes prior to launch, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. And then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the Strongback start retracting from the Falcon 9 rocket. It will recline to an angle of about 1.5 degrees. It will stay there until the moment of liftoff, when the Strongback throws back to clear the way for the climb of the Falcon 9. About 3 minutes before liftoff, the first stage liquid oxygen tank should be full, and then at around 2 minutes before launch, liquid oxygen loading should be complete on the second stage. In the final 60 seconds of the countdown, control will be handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks will be brought up to flight pressure. If everything is looking good, the SpaceX launch director will give their final go for liftoff at around T-minus 45 seconds. At T-minus 3 seconds, the engine ignition command will be issued. If all 9 Merlin 1D engines ignite and are deemed to be healthy, the onboard flight computer will command hold-down clamps to release the Falcon 9, and we'll see a liftoff at T0, which today is set for 3:26 and 10 seconds. Today will mark a milestone in SpaceX's efforts to increase their launch cadence. If launch occurs on time at 3:26 and 10 seconds, it will be just over 2 days since the last liftoff from this pad. To be precise, 2 days, 1 hour, 9 minutes, and 45 seconds. And that smashes the previous record at this pad by about 7 hours, I believe. One of the other factors that is helping SpaceX launch so many vehicles growing every year is the reusability of their vehicles. My colleague Will Robinson Smith is at the Space Force Association's Space Power Conference in Orlando, and he has sent us some video. At that conference, panelists discussed the massive increase in launch cadence from both the eastern and western ranges. One of those panelists was Kiko Donchev, the vice president of launch at SpaceX. And we have a clip here where Donchev talks about why that is driving the launch increase and what is enabling it.
We've talked about this huge increase, but like why the increase, right? So the first is the demand. The demand comes from the proliferation of large constellations in low Earth orbit. They're commercial from a communication perspective. Obviously, SpaceX has Starlink that's driven a large number of launches. But there's also a huge shift on the government side. When you look at the SDA missions, some of the other architecture that SpaceX is working on with large LEO constellations that can provide huge increases of capability and are definitely a shift from to traditional launch a bird, it's good for 15 years, right? Instead, we're building these huge constellations that have large number of satellites and you can replenish them quickly. So that's one. How do you serve that? You serve it through reusability. It's not just reusability of your orbital launch vehicle, it's your reusability of your launch pads, of your recovery systems, whatever it may be to enable that throughput. Actually in about an hour and a half, I think you may be able to see it from here. There's actually be a launch from Pad 40, which will be our 105th, I think, for the Cape, I believe. Can't keep the numbers totally straight in my head anymore. But that's following an NROL launch that happened on Tuesday. So a 49-hour turn on Pad 40 out of the Cape, right? That's an insane sort of launch cadence off the same pad. That sort of reusability is enabling hitting that demand. And then obviously, there's many new entrants now, right? We've got Blue Origin just had a huge success on their flight. We've introduced Vulcan this year. And so you've got many rockets entering the space, and it's just an incredibly exciting time in that sense.
And thanks to Will for filing that video just prior to us going on air this afternoon. That was Kiko Donchev, the Vice President of Launch at SpaceX. We've reached the point in the countdown where the launch director should have completed their go, no go poll. And if everything is looking good, we should be seeing the start of the propellant load sequence in just over 3 minutes from now. Well, it appears for whatever reason the SpaceX launch team did not come out of, did not go into the propellant load sequence or pull go for that load. We have a new T0 of 501. We're just adjusting our clock to reflect that. So unfortunately, we are now just over 2 hours from this launch of the Falcon 9. Not clear why SpaceX got down to the point at which they would have started propellant load and decided to push back liftoff. As we mentioned, and Kiko Donchev said in his presentation to the Space Power Conference, this is a record turnaround at this pad, so it's quite possible that they really were pushing the envelope here and were not quite ready to proceed. But we don't know the actual reason, and we will stay on the air and continue to bring you views of the Falcon 9 on the pad until we get a little closer to liftoff. Although the weather is beautiful, if there is a silver lining to the cloud of the launch delay, it is that the liftoff will push closer to sunset and golden hour here on the Space Coast. So could make for a spectacular liftoff when it does occur. The precise launch time is now 5:01 and 20 seconds Eastern Time. That's 22:01 UTC. We will stay on the air, continue to bring you views of the rocket, and I will make some occasional commentary, but for now we'll leave you with the sounds of the Kennedy Space Center and the sights of the Falcon 9. T-minus 2 hours and counting. If you're just joining us, the launch of the Starlink 6-90 mission has been pushed back to 5:01 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 22:01 UTC for our viewers around the world. We'll continue to bring you views of the Falcon 9 launch pad, and we will resume full commentary in about an hour. T-minus 1 hour, 30 minutes and counting. You're looking live at a Falcon 9 rocket on Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. If you're tuning in expecting to have seen a launch in the last 10 minutes or so, SpaceX pushed back this liftoff to 5:01 p.m. this afternoon. We don't know exactly why the T0 point of liftoff was moved this afternoon, but this is a record turnaround for this launch pad. The previous mission to fly from here was the NROL 77 mission, which lifted off on Tuesday. So now just about a little more over 2 days ago that mission went. If this Falcon 9 does indeed make it off the ground today at any point, it will set a new record for this launch pad. We'll continue to bring you views from around the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station as the clock continues to tick towards the expected liftoff at 5:01. Good afternoon from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. You're looking live at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where a Falcon 9 is standing awaiting liftoff in 1 hour, 12 minutes, and 30 seconds from now. The launch window today opened at 1:59 p.m. Eastern Time. SpaceX was originally targeting 3:26 p.m., but has pushed back the liftoff to 5:01 this afternoon. We have already seen improvement in visibility here at the Space Center as the heat waves of the afternoon begin to die down. So we're hoping for a spectacular golden hour liftoff. You're hearing some of the announcements taking place in the vehicle assembly building. Inside the building, NASA is preparing the Artemis 2 vehicle for liftoff early next year. And here at the KSC press site, we occasionally hear some of the announcements over the loudspeakers drifting over. So if you're wondering what that announcement was, that's all part of the operations in the vehicle assembly building. Today's launch will be the 161st Falcon 9 flight of this year, the 106th from Cape Canaveral. We'll continue to bring you views from around Florida's Space Coast of the Falcon 9 at Pad 40, and we'll resume our full coverage of this upcoming launch in the next 10 minutes or so. We're now less than an hour to the launch of a Falcon 9 rocket carrying 29 Starlink satellites for SpaceX. Liftoff this afternoon is now scheduled for 5:01 p.m. Eastern Time. We're now less than 55 minutes from the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket carrying 29 satellites for SpaceX's Starlink internet service. We're not entirely sure why the liftoff time was pushed back to 5:01 p.m. this afternoon, but if everything is now in place for a liftoff at that time, we're about 15 minutes away from the point at which the SpaceX launch director will have polled their team to determine if everything is indeed go for launch. Today's liftoff will be the 106th flight from Cape Canaveral this year. As you can see from this chart, the increase in launches over the last 4 or 5 years has been quite dramatic. Most of those launches have been by SpaceX and their Falcon 9 rocket. In the last couple of years, we've also seen the introduction of a couple of new launch vehicles to the Florida Space Coast, including ULA's Vulcan rocket and Blue Origin's New Glenn. We'll expect to see more of those vehicles flying next year. But the statistics at the moment dominated by SpaceX. So with this being the 106th launch from Cape Canaveral, it is also the 161st Falcon 9 rocket to launch this year. My colleague Will Robinson-Smith is at the Space Power conference over in Orlando today. That's organized by the Space Force Association. One of the sessions there featured the Vice President of Launch at SpaceX, Kiko Donchev, and he spoke about the launch cadence and gave us an idea of what SpaceX's goal is for the total number of launches this year. Originally, they'd hoped for maybe up to 180, and then looked at 170 as a more realistic number. So let's listen to Kiko as he gives us an update on where he thinks SpaceX will get on its launch record this year.
So we only hit 160 so far, so I don't want to count my chickens before they're totally hatched. But I think we'll get 167 this year, which is once again pretty amazing. But I used AI to come up with this answer, so don't quote me on it. Atlanta Hartsfield Airport did over 800,000 takeoff and landings last year. Okay, so while 167, 105, getting 75 from each of the ranges sounds crazy to us, it's nowhere close to how an airport operates. So if we are going to really take the next leap, we need to think about spaceport like aircraft-like operations, where our spaceports support multiple launches a day from multiple providers. They're not necessarily, maybe one flies more than the other, but there's equal footing, and the ability for everyone to fly is always there. That's going to come down to three main elements. The first is obviously infrastructure. We like to call it throughput. And the reason we say throughput, it's not just roads, it's waterways. It's all of the functions to be able to move the hardware and the people that make it possible to have such a launch cadence. We need to invest in a lot of science on blast and acoustics. I mean, one of the biggest pieces of feedback we hear about our large vehicle, and especially coming to the Cape, is how loud is Starship going to be? How is it going to impact the rest of the operators? We believe we've done some pretty good science, and it's not going to be maybe as impactful as some of the media outlets report, but that science needs to continue. And then third, and really a very important part of this, is we need to invest in the tools to manage the airspace, right? And to manage the scheduling of how you do all these things. These have been traditionally very manual type operations. We need to become much more operated in the way we move our vehicles, the way we schedule our vehicles, and then the way we manage our airspace. I mean, we really have to rethink the airspace problem, because the traditional method is just not going to fly, and we're going to need to have much more concurrent operations with aircraft rather than having a static hazard area that gets shut down sort of traditionally. I just don't think it will work otherwise.
That was Kiko Donchev, the SpaceX Vice President of Launch. One other way of looking at SpaceX's launch cadence is to review the rolling 365-day record for the Falcon 9. And if today's launch goes ahead as planned, it will be the 170th Falcon 9 launch in the last 365 days. So in some ways, SpaceX has met its goal of reaching 170 launches over the time frame of a year, just not in a calendar year at this point. Today's launch, if it goes ahead, will also be the fastest turnaround for Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. The last mission to lift off from this pad was the NROL 77 flight, which took off on Tuesday. If today's launch goes ahead at 5:01 p.m. Eastern Time, that will be a turnaround of 2 days, 2 hours, 44 minutes, and 55 seconds. That smashes the previous record of 2 days, 7 hours, 29 minutes, and 10 seconds. So not just a small reduction in that turnaround time, pretty much a full workday shaved off between launches. Round about now, the SpaceX launch director should have wrapped up their go, no-go poll in the Launch Control Center. That's located at the Hangar X facility to the west of the launch pad. For those of you just joining us, we'll quickly run through the countdown timeline here. The launch director will verify whether everyone has polled go for launch at about the T-minus 38 minute mark. That time can vary. Propellant load will start at T-minus 35 minutes. It starts with the loading of kerosene onto both the first and second stages, and the loading of oxygen onto the first stage. Helium is loaded in 2 waves into the first and second stages of the Falcon 9, starting at about 30 minutes and following up with the second stage at 4 minutes later. The helium is used to pressurize the propellant tanks and ensures that those propellants are fed through to the Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon 9. The loading of the second stage kerosene will concludes at the T-minus 23 minute mark. It's the smallest propellant tank on the vehicle, so that wraps up pretty quick after the start of the propellant load process. Loading of kerosene on the first stage will continue until later in the countdown. Next up will be the chill down of the Strongback structure. That's the truss-like support that sits up alongside the Falcon 9 at the launch pad. It actually provides some structural support to the vehicle, stops it swaying in the wind, and helps with the stability. It also provides conduits for propellants to the second stage, and air conditioning and electrical and data connections too. The chill down process will conclude with the start of liquid oxygen loading. The process of chilling those lines is required to avoid any boil off when the supercooled propellants come into contact with the slightly warmer propellant lines. It's a little chillier than normal in Florida today, but still much warmer than liquid oxygen. So they do want to make sure that those lines are thermally prepared for the start of that cryogenic propellant to flow. The next major milestone in the countdown comes at T-minus 7 minutes with the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines. Again, another process to thermally condition the launch vehicle's equipment prior to the engine ignition. Around 6 minutes, the loading of kerosene on the first stage should be complete. That's followed by the start of Strongback retraction. It will recline about 1.5 degrees from the vehicle, and at the moment of liftoff will throw back further to clear the way for the rocket's ascent. About 3 minutes before launch, the first stage liquid oxygen tank should be full. That's followed by the conclusion of loading of oxygen onto the second stage. At this point, the Falcon 9 will be fully fueled with 1 million pounds of propellants. In the final 60 seconds, the control of the countdown will be handed over from the ground sequencer to the onboard flight computers. Propellant tanks will be brought up to flight pressure, and the launch director will give their final go for launch if everything is looking good. The engine ignition command will be issued at T-minus 3 seconds. If all 9 Merlin 1D engines ignite and are healthy, the flight computer will command hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 for a liftoff at T0, which is currently scheduled for 5:01 and 20 seconds. T-minus 35 minutes and counting. At this point, if everything is going according to plan, we should be seeing the start of propellant load on the vehicle. As I mentioned earlier, that will begin with the loading of kerosene on both the first and second stages, and liquid oxygen on the first stage. As you can see from our views, it's a beautiful day on Florida's Space Coast. The weather doesn't get much better for a rocket launch. The 45th Weather Squadron, the Space Force weather forecasters, yesterday issued a forecast with a less than 5% chance of a violation of the weather rules for liftoff. They forecast just a few clouds, and it looks like they've got that right. There's mostly blue skies here, just a few wispy clouds offshore that you can just about make out in the satellite imagery here. But it is a beautiful winter's day here in Florida. So earlier in the day, we saw the countdown clock get pretty close to this point when SpaceX pushed back the launch. We've had no word yet that anything has changed as far as the scheduled 5:01 liftoff, but we should hopefully see the first signs of propellants flowing into the Falcon 9's tanks. You can see in this zoomed in view the fairly sooty first stage of this Falcon 9. It's making its 16th flight today, and I believe we might just be starting to see some signs that propellant load has begun. If you look pretty much in the center of the screen, we should start to see a frost line form. It's a little hard to tell with the vegetation. But this frost line is created when the super cold liquid oxygen comes into contact with the metal fuselage of the Falcon 9 and chills things down so that the moisture in the atmosphere starts to condense, both forming frost on the vehicle and creating vapor that I do believe we are starting to see. It's a little tricky today because of the vegetation, but it does seem like there are signs that the frost line is starting to make its way up the side of the vehicle. The wind is coming today from the north, and it does appear that that may be affecting the way the frost is building up. We're seeing a lot more on the downwind side of the vehicle, on the right-hand side as we're looking at it here. So the frost line also serves as a handy fuel gauge. As the propellant tank fills, that frost line will start to creep its way up the side of the rocket. Over in the Launch Control Center, they've got a lot more sophisticated graphical displays that show those tanks filling up, but we have to make do with this visual indicator, and definitely appears that loading of propellants is underway at pad 40. At this point in the countdown, in addition to the loading of propellants, cryogenic helium will start flowing into the storage tanks on the first stage of the vehicle. In a couple of minutes, that helium will also start loading into the second stage. Now less than 25 minutes to the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket. Big thank you to Michael McGorry for a $2 super chat. Appreciate the compliment. I'm probably doing 1.25 jobs today. Fortunately, I have John Pisani helping out along with Adam Bernstein running the cameras today. Yeah, warm welcome to the almost 1,900 of you joining us for this live coverage. If you haven't done so already, please hit the like button. That really helps us out. Also, want to give a shout out to our moderators, Jeff Hansen and Rick Donna, have been taking care of things in the chat. So thank you for your support of our coverage today. A little bit later in the broadcast, we'll be taking a look at the trajectory for this mission. Spoiler alert, it is heading to the southeast, but we'll go into a little more detail on that shortly. Around this time, the loading of kerosene into the second stage should be wrapping up. It's the smallest tank on the vehicle, so that operation gets wrapped up pretty quickly. We're also coming up on the so-called big vent, where the chill down of the Strongback is performed to clear the way for the start of the loading of liquid oxygen on the second stage. Just to give you a bit of a preview of what you can expect from our tracking team, this is a view of an aircraft parsing near Melbourne, Florida. And we can do better than that, though. So we're just tuning things in at the moment. This is a flight from Zurich to Miami, Swiss Airlines by the look of it. And this will give you a sense of what you're going to see when this Falcon 9 rocket leaves the launch pad, coming from the tracking equipment of Pete Costens at Max Q Productions. So a big thank you to Pete for setting up to support this launch today. Coming up on the big vent, we should see that very soon. And you can just see in Chuck Briggs's video from Merritt Island the start of the big vent from the Strongback. You can see it there to the left of the vehicle. It's a little hard to see against the sky, but we're seeing the start of that chill down process. Here's a view of that same operation from the KSC press site where our cameras are located. So this chill down process prepares the propellant lines for the start of loading of liquid oxygen into the second stage. It'll continue for a few more minutes. We'll continue to watch those vapors trail away from the Falcon 9 as we count down past the T-minus 19-minute mark now towards the launch of this Falcon 9 with 29 Starlink satellites. So with the conclusion of the big vent, we're just seeing the Coast Guard helicopter patrolling behind the launch pad there, out in the coastal area, making sure there's no vessels in the danger zone that is cleared prior to a liftoff. But with the conclusion of the so-called big vent, we're now into the loading of liquid oxygen into the second stage of the Falcon 9. So as promised, let's take a look at the trajectory for this particular mission. The Falcon 9 will lift off from the pad at Space Launch Complex 40, which you can see in this Google Earth image from above. And in the box on the right, you can see live right now with the Falcon 9. There you see Space Launch Complex 40 on the Florida Space Coast. And here's that southeasterly trajectory that just skirts the islands of the Bahamas. It's heading towards an orbit inclined at 43 degrees to the equator. Following stage separation, the first stage will land on one of SpaceX's 3 drone ships. The one on deck tonight is just read the instructions. The drone ship is stationed about 365 miles downrange in the Atlantic Ocean, east of the Bahamas. While the first stage makes its way back to Earth, the upper stage will continue on with its cargo of 29 Starlink satellites. The 2 halves of the payload fairing will peel away from the upper stage and descend to a splashdown in the Atlantic, a bit further downrange from the booster landing zone. SpaceX will use one of its East Coast recovery ships to scoop up those payload fairings. This is another example of SpaceX reducing the costs of spaceflight. It states that it saves about $7 million by performing this operation to fish the payload fairing halves out of the water and reuse them. Starting to see some color in the sky here on Florida Space Coast as the sun begins to set. Should be a spectacular liftoff tonight in the so-called golden hour, the photographer's favorite time of day. Just hear a helicopter passing overhead here at the Kennedy Space Center press site. That is quite likely to be a security chopper that is checking the area. Sounded like it might have been heading out towards the pad, but a little difficult for us to see from inside the building. Now less than 10 minutes from the launch of the Falcon 9. So at this point in the countdown, liquid oxygen is being loaded onto both the first and second stages. The loading of kerosene onto the first stage is nearing the conclusion of that process. For those of you wanting to set your clocks precisely, the exact T0 today is 5:01 and 20 seconds Eastern Standard Time. Very soon we should be getting some pad views from SpaceX, and we'll bring those to you as soon as we have them. Coming up on the T-minus 6-minute mark. At this point, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines should be underway. SpaceX will be flowing a small amount of propellants through those turbopumps and the plumbing associated with those engines to ensure there's no thermal shock when the ignition sequence begins at T-minus 3 minutes. We'll be coming up on the start of Strongback retraction momentarily.
Falcon 9 tanks are pressurizing for Strongback retract.
There we hear that call. The Falcon 9 tanks are being pressurized to make the vehicle a little more rigid before the retraction of the clamp arms at the top of the second stage, which helps support the rocket, stops it swaying in the wind. The propellant inside the fuel tanks will keep the vehicle stable at this point. We're looking now for the retraction of those clamp arms at the top of the... There we go. We see the one on the left-hand side, followed by the right-hand side in that view. You can really see the low sun angle as we approach sunset here on the Space Coast. Less than 4 minutes now to the launch of the Falcon 9. The Strongback is going to pull away from the vehicle to an angle of about 1.5 degrees, and will then stay in that position until just before liftoff, when it will pull away in a more rapid fashion. T-minus 3 minutes and counting. The rocket's autonomous destruct system is being armed shortly, and liquid oxygen topping
Stage 1, LOX load complete.
will be terminated soon. And there we have confirmation that the first stage is now full with its load of liquid oxygen. Well, we're not seeing a lot of vapor on the vehicle itself because of the atmospheric conditions here and the slightly chilly weather that we're experiencing in Florida, that probably be quite welcomed by some of our viewers further north. There is
Stage 2, LOX load complete.
there's quite a bit of vapor swirling around at the base of the pad. So with that call that liquid oxygen on the second stage is now fully loaded, the Falcon 9 is fully fueled for launch. Starting to see some venting. These are the ground gas closeouts.
Ground gas closeouts.
This clears the propellant lines at the pad from any potential explosive vapors that might cause a fire at liftoff. Coming up on the 1 minute mark.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
There we have it. The onboard computers now have control of the countdown. Let's listen in for the launch director's final go for launch.
Launch director, go for launch.
And there we have it. The SpaceX launch director has cleared this Falcon 9 rocket for liftoff. 30 seconds. 20. 15. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 carrying 29 satellites on the Starlink 6-90 mission. And the vehicle has cleared the tower. One minute into flight. Falcon 9 traveling faster than the speed of sound and approaching the point of maximum dynamic pressure. There we hear that call that the vehicle is experiencing maximum aerodynamic pressure as it climbs through the atmosphere at ever-increasing velocity. As the Falcon 9 continues on its path to the southeast of the Space Center, it is now got less than 30 seconds into the first stage burn before we see separation. We'll also have the chill down of that second stage engine underway. There we see separation of the first and second stages, ignition of the second stage. Coming up soon is the payload fairing jettison. There go the two halves of the fairing. Seeing those separating in the onboard view in the bottom right of the screen, but you can clearly see them in Pete's tracking view here. Perfect lighting conditions to capture this. Seeing the first stage now in the center of the main box on this screen. You can also see the view from the onboard cameras on that first stage and the titanium grid fins that deployed soon after stage separation. The Falcon 9 is slowly reaching its maximum altitude as it arcs out over the Atlantic Ocean, heading towards the drone ship. Just read the instructions, stationed offshore of Bermuda. The Bahamas, sorry. Getting my islands mixed up. In Pete's tracking camera, you can clearly see the cold gas thrusters pulsing on that vehicle, helping to keep it oriented as it now starts its fall back to Earth. Gravity has restored its grip on this vehicle and is pulling it back into the atmosphere. The next major event will be the entry burn. That burn starts with the ignition of the center Merlin engine on the Falcon 9, followed by two of the outer engines. It's crucial for the recovery of the booster. Without it, the first stage would burn up in the atmosphere. Essentially, it is slamming on the brakes. You can see the Falcon 9 was briefly above the Kármán line, but has now descended below the 100-kilometer mark that is considered to be the boundary of space. Meanwhile, the upper stage, pictured in the bottom right of your screen, is continuing to fire, now traveling more than 13,000 kilometers per hour. As the Falcon 9 falls back through the atmosphere, Pete's view is getting a little murky, but you can still just make out that first stage in the center of the screen there as we near the, and there we have it, as we near the entry burn. We're seeing that burn in real time. We'll see it in the SpaceX feed shortly. So returning to the SpaceX footage, which comes to us with a little bit of a delay. You can still see that burn underway here. Falcon 9 is under 25 kilometers in altitude now, falling towards the drone ship. Just read the instructions. This is the 16th flight of this particular booster. Coming in through the cloud deck, starting to drop below the speed of sound. Coming up on the landing burn. There we see the ignition of that single Merlin engine for the landing burn. A view from the deck of the drone ship as the Falcon 9 approaches. SpaceX providing confirmation of landing and of the shutdown of the second stage MVAC engine. The Falcon 9 second stage with its payload of 29 satellites is now confirmed to be in its planned parking orbit. It will remain in that orbit for about 45 minutes or so before performing a short burn to circularize the orbit of the second stage, and that will be followed by deployment of the Starlink satellites. They will then use their Argon hole thrusters to maneuver into their operational orbit. So we're just starting to put together some replays. It was a spectacular launch, so don't go anywhere. We'll be bringing you those in the next few minutes or so. It takes a little while for us to get all of those shots in place so that we can review this, what was a really spectacular launch. Just proves that good things come to those who wait. It was a bit of a disappointment earlier today to learn that the launch had been pushed back until 5:01 from the originally planned 3:26, but it turned out to be a gorgeous evening to see this Falcon 9 fly from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral. We'll also have our mission stats for you, so stand by while we get those ready, and we'll review this mission as the numbers stack up. So let's take a look at the statistics as they stand following the so far successful flight of the Starlink 6-90 mission. It will be another hour and 5 minutes before the satellites are deployed from the Falcon 9, so we cannot truly call this mission a success until then, but so far everything appears to be looking good as far as this flight is concerned. Let's start with our SpaceX launch statistics. This is the 16th flight of Falcon 9 booster 1083. This booster joined the SpaceX fleet back in March 2024 on a mission carrying a new crew to the International Space Station, the Crew 8 mission, which flew on a Dragon vehicle. Of note, this booster also flew the Polaris Dawn mission. That flight, of course, was commanded by Jared Isaacman, who is now nearly confirmed as NASA administrator. A few administrative steps still to go in that process, but if everything continues as it appears to have done, he will be the new NASA administrator very soon. This is the 578th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 161st Falcon 9 launch of the year, the 513th Falcon booster reflight. It's the 170th SpaceX orbital launch in the last 365 days. This is the highest that statistic has reached. It did reach this last month, but SpaceX fell back a little in that particular statistic. But right now, quite an achievement to have chalked up 170 launches in 365 days. This was the 297th SpaceX orbital launch from Pad 40. The first Falcon 9 vehicle took off from this launch pad. A mission to demonstrate the technology for the Dragon, Crew Dragon vehicle. That flight was back in 20. I'm gonna struggle here. Want to make sure I give you the right date for that first launch. Yeah, that launch was back in 2010, June of 2010, when the Falcon 9 vehicle flew for the first time. Meanwhile, it was the 352nd orbital launch from this particular pad, which started off its work on military missions. So taking a look at our bar chart for the number of Falcon 9 launches per year, you can see we've far exceeded the total set in 2024 and have reached 161 this year alone. Moving on to our recovery stats, it was the 145th landing on Just Read the Instructions, the 450th SpaceX drone ship landing, the 549th SpaceX booster landing, and the 550th overall booster landing for the space industry, which includes the recent flight of Blue Origin's New Glenn. Taking a look at our space industry stats for 2025, it was the 106th orbital launch from Florida, the 170th orbital launch from U.S. soil, the 185th orbital launch from a U.S. rocket company, including those of Rocket Lab, which scrubbed a launch last night, but is also included in these stats. Even though many of their launches are from New Zealand, they are a U.S. company. It was the 301st orbital launch attempt globally, and there have been 8 orbital launch failures this year. Taking a look at Cape Canaveral launches, this was the 106th launch here at the Cape. You can see that launch cadence increasing dramatically over the last 4 or 5 years. Finally, taking a look at our bar chart, you can see that the vast majority of launches have come from the US, driven primarily by SpaceX, with China trailing in second place there, with 28% of the overall orbital launches this year. So our replays are just about ready, so thank you for staying with us. We'll bring those to you momentarily. So we'll start our replays with our fixed camera here at the KSC press site. That plume looking quite spectacular after liftoff there with the setting sun. Now let's turn to the turn basin. Now we have the wide tracker from Pete Karstens of Max Q Productions. And you'll hear this again in the next replay, but you can hear the screech of the vehicle assembly building as the sound waves from the Falcon 9 rattle those metal panels on the side of NASA's big assembly building here. The southeasterly trajectory creates quite a spectacular side-on view as the Falcon 9 heads downrange. The plume of the Falcon 9 expanding as the atmospheric pressure drops with the ever-increasing altitude of the climbing vehicle. We're seeing MECO shut down on the first stage and the separation of the first and second stages. Now moving on to Pete's tighter view here. It's amazing that in these views from Pete's tracking camera, you can still see that frost line on the vehicle, even as it climbs through the atmosphere. We're approaching the point of cutoff of the first stage engines and separation of the second stage. See those two vehicles moving apart and the ignition of that second stage Merlin vacuum engine and the departing first stage firing its cold gas thrusters. Quite spectacular footage today, and we're coming up on payload fairing separation in this replay. There you go. You can really see those payload fairing halves peeling away from the vehicle. Just spectacular. Now moving on to Chuck and Jen Briggs' camera on Merritt Island. There we see stage separation. Now moving on to Adam's tracker here at the KSC press site. Incredible views from our Adam Bernstein at the Falcon 9 roaring away from the Space Coast just before sunset this afternoon. In this replay, we've just seen main engine cutoff and stage separation. So just wanted to give a big thank you to a couple of people in our chat. Norm Ritzel for a $5 super chat, who's asking about the conference we were referring to earlier. That was the Space Force Association Space Power Conference in Orlando, Florida, taking place this week. Will Robinson Smith is there and will bring us all the news from that event. Also, a big thank you to Chuck Close for a $25 super chat. Thank you so much. We really appreciate everyone's support. Big thank you to everyone who's joined us today for this liftoff of the Falcon 9, to Rick Donner and Jeff Hansen, who were moderating our chat, to John Pisani, who was running the technical aspects of today's broadcast, Adam Bernstein, who managed the cameras today and tracked the launch from our Kennedy Space Center vantage point. Also thanks to Chuck and Jen Briggs for bringing us views from Merritt Island, and Pete Carsons with MaxQ Productions for tracking the launch from the south. So with that, we'll leave you with the spectacular views looking out over the Kennedy Space Center turn basin as the sky fills with color on the Florida Space Coast as we approach sunset. Until next time, a very good evening. Bye-bye.